So the whole purpose of this channel is going to change. Not that this channel ever really had a purpose. I was more or less scattershot, but now I'm going to be self-indulgently scattershot. And what I'm going to really, the grand objective, to the extent that there's going to be a unifying one from one video to the next, the grand objective is going to be me venting about my pet peeves that, as far as I can see, are no one else's pet peeves, but that are probably some of the most rational pet peeves a person can have if they're switched on, if they've been paying attention to things in public affairs, things on social media. Why do I say social media? It's just a stupid term. Like, what is YouTube? Like, is YouTube social media? Am I doing social media now by recording a video? Are you doing a social media by watching the video? No, it's just stuff that we used to refer to as surfing the net. So see there, just a minute in, I'm talking and I've just randomly spotted one of these things that are always grumbling in my mind. People using the term social media when there's no real boundaries. There's no real way to sniff out the peripheries, the borderlands. And kind of being on YouTube is a prime example of that, because I don't like to say that what I'm doing now is social media. I'm just vlogging. The term social media doesn't outlast the term vlogging. It came after it, but nonetheless we've blended it. So a lot of these things in terms of my pet peeves do come down to language. I'm just going to be unapologetically anal about the way people use and misuse language. And yeah, I'm just going to keep pointing out the fact that it's just zero remorse. For a long time, I've known that this channel is not about any type of activism, boosterism. And so the next obvious step is just going to be it's kind of, impersonal issues meet personal kind of journal-like vents. If you want to come along for the ride, great. I've recorded a prelude to this that I'm going to probably put at the end of it. In that prelude, I pretty much point out that as bad as the views are, something like between 350 to 450 views per video since my self-exile finished at the tail end of 2015, that's pretty much been the average. But as dismal as that is, that's not the actual views. Because what I consider the actual views to be is the view retention count, which, if I'm reading those statistics right, the people who actually stick around for the bulk of the video or the entirety of the video, it's even worse than this average that I think is between 350 and 450. It's something like hovering around 200 at best, if we actually count the people who watch the video in its entirety. So all these things I have about, like, well, don't be too self-indulgent, try to fixate on the issues that are going to be more, the other viewers would have had on their minds, so that they can maybe enjoy it. I'm just done with that. Like, if I'm noticing a pet peeve that's bothering me, it's not bothering anyone else, I'm going to talk about it. And what would be wonderful is if the specific things I bring up are things that some of the viewers had kind of at the precipice, at the tip of their tongue, things that they subconsciously or maybe, I don't know, like subliminally bothered them, but they were just on the cusp of realizing it, or maybe they realized it but they just could never find the terms to put it in, and by watching my video. Like, if I do this for the rest of my YouTube career and just one person says, oh, this specific thing you ranted about, I've never heard anyone else rant about, but it actually did bother me. I just didn't realize it bothered me until you crystallized it for me in your specific, the whatever way you put it. And so, absolutely, the triviality of this channel is probably going to be bumped up, if not skyrocket, because I'm going to take the plunge on these things. Because I actually think they're, in a weird sort of way, they are more important than all the other things people are talking about, namely things in public affairs and politics, which we need to stop. Like, just understand this. I understand if you are interested in politics, that temptation to spout off your views is very tempting, but you don't need to read widely to conclude that what you're saying, your take, is going to be parroted 1,000-fold. The internet's a huge place. A lot of people are contributing to it. So it's really unlikely that your political takes, as unique or heterodox as you think they might be, that they're really going to bring something new to the table. There really just is that many people spouting off on them, and so you're just going to be a part of the chorus. And why be a part of the chorus when there are so many other fascinating things to discuss? And by doing the pre-political and even really pre-institutional, by fixating on those sorts of issues, a lot of, I guess, social issues, by doing that, you can really, certain things that I've complained about in the past in terms of people mistakenly, when they really try to zero in on one or another type of identity that's going to be their primary identity, in terms of like their ideological primary identity or their intellectual primary identity, they always pick one or another of these political labels as that thing, as the identifier. And nowhere, there's no better way to show how glaringly naive that is and hasty that is than if you just listen to me talk about these things that really have nothing to do with what's going on, the news cycle or politics and even really high stakes politics. Things like stuff going on in international relations. It's probably 2022 so far has probably been more interesting, more fascinating than any previous year in living memory, certainly in my lifetime. Maybe 1989 tops it in terms of consequential. And I have so many things to say, but I just know that even if it's rarely spouted, it's just because I haven't read widely enough, and whatever unique take I think I might have on what ought to be done in terms of the exact like negotiations, like how to get Russia to back off Ukraine. It's just that I haven't read far enough to know that, oh yeah, there's other people who are making those points. And so we should strive for novelty, and the best way to strive for novelty is to just know that if it's going to be political, it's like you're not being novel as much as you think you are. And so one pet peeve, for the first time in my life, I started a YouTube video that was pretty long and very polished, like a documentary style YouTube video. It's by the user Then and Now. The title is Our Consumer Society. And I couldn't finish it. It's not that long, it's not really the length that did me in. It's something that he did, the presenter, the guy who runs the channel. I think I called it right. Yeah, the channel is called Then and Now. Our Consumerist Society, or Our Consumer Society. It's uploaded a month ago. It's an hour and 24 minutes. I made it about halfway in and then I just quit. And the reason I did is what he does as a presenter, and I know he's trying to be very polished, that's why he made it into one of these documentary style videos, but what he's trying to do is just so desperately, what he's trying to do is to not come across as threatening or judgmental. It's so clear, this sort of, I'm not going to call it an anti-consumeristic video, but it's clearly moving toward, as the video is progressing, he's buttering up the viewers to be consumer skeptics. We've seen these types of videos enough over the years, and he's just doing another one of those types of videos. And that's a fine enough message. Obviously, I'm the closest thing to a minimalist, so I can appreciate it for the substance, where he's setting to, but the presentation, I had to stop. Because every time he's referring to the societal activity, he keeps saying, we have done this. We have substituted inner peace. We have substituted solidarity. We have substituted community for the gadgets, for the this, for the that, for the shiny object, right? And it's just so obvious that he has not been swindled by any of this. This is so obviously a guy who is not taken in by advertising. Scroll to the comment section. All his viewers are making the right sort of comments in terms of just ragging on, like hyper consumers at least. And so why the we? Why the figurative, non-literal? Over and over in the video, if you watch it, it'll just like we, because he's so desperate to not come across as judgmental and threatening to someone who like may have not heard these types of points before, and who might be more receptive to them if they don't feel like they're being judged by the person that's speaking to them through the camera, right? And this is just one of many stylistic things that just drives me up the wall, because what he's doing is so emblematic of what's wrong with culture at large. Navigating social spaces, and even not even social spaces, just these kind of transactional spaces, right? You know, every now and then someone makes a quip. It's like, geez, man, how long has it been since your last haircut? And it's like, why don't you just get haircuts more often, man? Your hair's a mess. And my hair absolutely is a mess. It's somewhat contained when I'm indoors, but if it's windy outside and I'm going for one of my long walks, like by the time I get back in, it's going to be a mess. And so if I walk to work, by the time I get to work, yeah, it's going to be a mess, because most days see some amount of wind, and I like to take the English Bay route. So anyway, so it's like when it gets to be this point, like 10 months or 11 months between haircuts, you know, I get people starting to make cracks. And then I list some of the reasons why I wait as long as I do. Among those reasons, probably the biggest reason is just a complete lack of patience for barbers. Nowhere is it more glaring, the trade-offs in terms of politeness versus honesty, than when you're dealing with the sort of barbers that I've had experience with. Like every single thing, whether it's them doing a bad job and, well, the haircut's done, so what's the point of bringing it up to them? Just go to a different place next time. Or, more to the point, is the sort of barber who tries to make chit-chat with you as they're giving you the haircut. And so I can usually, at this point, I've just been around the block enough times, I can sniff out who's switched on and who isn't, who has like the slightest clue about what a relevant conversation is versus who doesn't. If I'm gonna get kind of hubristic about it, who's fit to lace my boots in terms of like just even having a debate like with my pinky finger. Because I'm sorry, and this is just truth, right? This is what I believe. It just is the case that most people, it's not just that they're not fit to lace my boots, they're not fit to lace like the boots of my little pinky in terms of a dialectic exchange. Not even a debate, but just an exchange on a real worthwhile topic. And so often throughout my life, I just hemmed and hawed. Barber makes a reference about the weather. Barber makes her asking me something about, so what do you do? And then, okay, well, that itself is another problem. See, I just randomly brought up another thing. The pathology of our culture resides in the question, what do you do? Now, that's not a complete question. Like, that question taken literally could mean a great number of things. But we've just so had the wool pulled over our eyes by way of workism, and really, a term no one uses, but they should use, is by identitarian workism, pouring so much of our identity into our profession, our occupation, and sometimes even you work these dead-end jobs and people still, first and foremost, like they're asked about themselves, they start talking about their jobs, right? But really, it's the question, what do you do? That's not a complete question, but everyone reads it, everyone decodes it as being complete, because everyone knows how obsessed everyone is with work. And we just read the final bit of that question into the equation. And so we know everyone's talking about work. And so these are the sort of things that I'd like to see more people tell me, whether once they've heard me announce what exactly is wrong with it, whether they think I'm making too much of a fuss out of nothing, or whether they think, oh, actually, you know what, that is really a good way to pick up on just how outsized one's profession is. Everyone's view of what one's profession, the role of a profession and a trade, just how outsized the role that plays in terms of this kind of, self-esteem management, self-esteem upkeep. Right, so I just deliberately, when I hear that question now, as I did with the barber, deliberately, last time I had a haircut, it's like, well, that depends what day you find me on. Certain days I do certain things, certain days I do certain other things. And of course the barber thinks I didn't get it, so he said, oh, I meant, what is your job? And so then I decided to be a little risque, a little sneaky, and a little challenging. And I said, oh, I knew damn well what you meant. But you shouldn't have asked that question the way you did. You should have asked me, what is your job? And then to conjoin that, I made pretty much the exact same rant I made right now. And the barber didn't take too kindly to that, and things turned sour. Things don't even have to turn sour to that extent. You could just be short with them when they try to make idle chatter. Things in the way of referencing the weather. I'm asked about my vacation. This is another reason why like conversations with people at work are so useless. Like anytime my vacation is coming up, I get asked, are you going to travel? And every time I have to veer off into my rant as to why traveling is just absolutely nonsensical. Right? And I make it a point to use the word staycation. No, I am not going to travel. I'm having a staycation. And it's so clear that people reset because I've had 3 vacations this year. I chose to break off my 3 weeks into 3 separate weeks across 3 separate months. And multiple people, I think it was on all 3, but definitely on 2 of those 3, multiple people asked me, who have asked me in the past, like, are you going to travel or are you staying in Vancouver? And so it's like, and so I got toward the end, I got a little impatient and aggressive. And I just said, you asked me this in April, and then you asked me in February as well. And here's June. This is when my 3rd vacation was. It was in June. The recording date of this is July 24th, but that happened in June. And then I just told them flat out, maybe since you clearly don't care, and I don't blame you for not caring, because I don't care about your vacation. Since you clearly don't care, you shouldn't even ask me. If you cared, you would have remembered what I told you about how I always have the staycation when you asked me about my upcoming vacation in April and in February. And I just flat out told them, and there was no punchline. They were expecting the punchline at the end because I got a bit agitated. And usually at work, over the years, back when I was more nice, when I kind of tried to walk the line between politeness and honesty, but it's really not a balance act you can ever master. You just find yourself compromising, right? But in the past at work, when I would show some amount of agitation with the mindlessness that goes on, I would always tack on a little punchline at the end of my agitation to make the colleagues feel that that they haven't done anything wrong. And I'm just done with that. And I invite you to be done with it too. If you can navigate the social world and not incur any major cost by doing that sort of thing. So if you're like walking a tightrope at work, if you're walking a thin line, you might get fired as a result of it. You got to do that cost-benefit analysis. I'm at a point in my life now where I don't. I've never been as out of fucks to give, and I've never been, though I really don't know what my long-term financial prospects are because of just how calamitous the landscape is, even for us kind of low-risk investors. I never touched crypto, but crypto tanked so bad that a lot of people who never touched it are being negatively affected by it, even as low-risk investors. But despite all that, I'm just still out of fucks to give. Even if my savings go nowhere, at least this place won't go nowhere. This place will retain its value, and that's enough of a cushion. So I'm like, yeah, if I'm a little too antagonistic at work and one too many people take issue with it, and there's like a petition to get me out of there, like even a covert petition, that's fine. I'll be quite okay being unemployed for a number of years. Yeah, so I'm just done tacking in little jokes, little quips to make people feel comfortable. Like if I'm scathingly critical, I just let it rip. And it's been so rejuvenating because there's so much phoniness. And I don't know why. Like, it's so obvious that I'm not the type of person who would ever take umbrage with someone for not being curious about what I'm going to do on my vacation or any number of things. And yet, people still feel the need to ask questions, right? And it's not like there's a shortage of actual issues that they know I'm interested in, that they can strike up a conversation with me about, right? Maybe they feel a little insecure that I know so much about those issues and they're not really that passionate about them. But I've told them before. I've told so many people before that, I don't think I'm smarter than you simply because I'm switched on when it comes to what I view as really important issues, whether they're topical or timeless, right? That doesn't make me smarter at all. It just means I have these specific interests, and I could be wrong that these are objectively superior interests to yours. I've told people that. But despite that, I think there's a bit of a reservation on a lot of people's part to just ask me to say more about these things, these topics that I find interesting. Some of them being the topics that I've made videos about before. And so they always bring it down to the trivial, the everyday, the elevator talk, the chit-chat. And if they just didn't reset, maybe I would even have tolerance for that. But it's the fact that they reset. And so the barber that asked me about, I just completely flipped out because I had this buildup of negative experiences with the colleagues. But yeah, that's pretty much what social reality is we're constantly navigating. Do we want to be on any given day with any given person polite and dishonest or impolite and honest? These are just these recurring things that just the older I get, I find it more trenchant. It's not going away, it's just being more strengthened, these difficult decisions that have to be made. And I just wish I could travel back in time to my younger self where I was just maybe a bit too on the polite side, polite and therefore dishonest side. Because I think when you just let loose, what happens is a lot of judgments that are really latent and buried come to the surface. And so I tend to think like, am I really that much more judgmental and harsh than the average person? And I don't think I am. I just think that what I'm in touch with is those latent judgments that a lot of people still make, but it's not like an articulated thought in their brains. But it ought to be. Every single negative judgment that someone made of me that they didn't relate to me because they thought it would be impolite or rude or something, they thought it would damage me in some way. Little do they know my narcissistic ways and how low a view I have of people's negative judgment of me, whether it's expressed or not, right? But every single judgment, though it's not something that would cripple me or even get me to be really all that bothered by it, I still wish that they would have told me, right? No matter how harsh, just tell me. If something about me rubs you the wrong way, well, I'm super pissed off. I was in such a groove. I actually watched it back. I was in such a groove there, and the next thing I know is I see on the screen saying battery life clunks out, or however the camera said it. It's like, what? Yeah, I had done some testing before I started recording the video just to see if there would be some other kind of issues, because this camera has been wobbly with a few things. But none of those things were battery related. So now I've got it plugged in, but when it clunked out, I didn't have it plugged in, but it was more than 2/3 charged at the time I started recording that. And so it had no business having 2/3 of it evaporate within the span of that first, however long that was. And it really pissed me off. Because one thing that really pisses me off about the camera is it's got just a gajillion features, 99.9% of which I'm pretty sure I'm never going to use. I think it's a camera for film buffs or some sort of hyper techies. And just all these, just the options aren't even colloquial enough to the point where like I can understand. It's just so much next level tech jargon. I'm having buyer's remorse, but neither here nor there. It just sucks that I was in this groove, and of all the things to disrupt me, the battery. The one thing that I really needed from a new camera is the ability to record for hours on end, because I think there's an aesthetic to having an uninterrupted. Just an uninterrupted rant. We've lost so much of that in terms of with the passage of time, what YouTube was and what I still think it could be at its best. That it's not, because no one really seems to care about the aesthetic of just watching themselves back uninterrupted. And so now there's an interruption, and I don't know if I can recover my groove, but I'm certainly going to try. I just watched it back, and I know it cut off right at the part where I said. On the one hand, I did point out, I was like, I'm too narcissistic and egotistical to care about other people's negative judgment of me, but that's only half right. I do care very much if they're factually mistaken something about me. Then I'll go to great lengths to clarify that factual mistake, and if following that they still have a negative view on me, then fair enough. I'm not going to let those types of people live rent-free in my head. Though I'd be lying if I said I didn't care what they think. I'm just not going to go above and beyond to try to change their minds. But I still care what they think, and I think all of us should care what everyone thinks, from the person you respect more than anyone else in the world to the person you least respect, or least admire, or least something, right? We should still care just viscerally, and I hope I'm not unique in that regard. I hope I'm not the only one who just has this visceral concern with what people think. I think it's a good way to hone just one's inner dialogue, because if you've had an exchange with someone, whether you respect them or not, it's good to revisit that exchange. And maybe a lot of people don't, because they just convince themselves that, like, because the person is just so unimpressive on numerous fronts, that therefore I don't care what they think. It's like, no. That's probably the one thing that sticks out of me that thinking back now about some of the Schopenhauer takes, is he did bemoan the fact that we spend so much time with concern over what people think. And maybe he meant it in a different way. He meant it in that way where we're concerned what people think because what they think impacts our self-esteem. And absolutely, in that respect, I'm not saying that we should be concerned in that way. But we should just be concerned viscerally, because it does it does get us further away from epistemic misconduct and closer to epistemic conduct. So absolutely, yeah. When it comes to this issue with the colleagues that I was on about, they don't have to care. They don't have to be curious, and I don't have to be curious about anything they bring up. And we should be mature at this point as a culture. We should have gotten to the point of maturity where we know work is just a place where you show up, and it's okay. Every now and then, I'm just in my own world when I'm at work. I'm doing the tasks I need to do, but it's like really, I'm at my sharpest when it comes to prospective video making when I'm at work, and it's just all this just inner life activity, inner monologue or inner dialogue, whichever it is, and someone just points out, "Oh, no avail, you seem kind of quiet today," and I just try so hard not to snipe at them and just to politely say, "Actually, no, I'm having the time of my life, but I'm just having an inner debate, really, in some cases, and sometimes I lose to my version of my devil's advocate within my own head as I'm having these debates on really tricky, dicey issues. It's actually how I sometimes change my mind on certain things, or at least lower my confidence level on certain positions that I have, is, it's quiet enough at work, there's a lull in the activity, and you're kind of doing the task, but just as so many people are conversationally on autopilot, you're on autopilot in terms of the workload, because you can still do it. Once you've done it for long enough, you can do it blindfolded. But what that affords you, if it's quiet enough, it's not always possible to do this, but what that affords, hopefully you, and certainly what it affords me, is just honing the inner dialogue, and honing it to the point of almost perfection, maybe that's getting ahead of myself. But then the disruption of that is just the person going, "Oh, you're quiet today, no avail," and you just have to say, "Actually, no, I'm having the time of my life, and I'm crafting certain things that you cannot begin to appreciate." I don't think that was verbatim what I said, but it was in that ballpark, and it felt pretty good. And I know what happened when I stepped out, right? No one trashed me while I was in, but I know they trashed me as soon as I step out. I'm fucking sure of it, because I see so many people trash. Be polite to someone, and then the moment that someone steps out of the cubicle area or out of the kitchen, wherever the conversation's taking place, they trash them, and it's amazing. These people really can't connect. Go all the way from A to Z when it comes to certain social, obvious truths, but they can't connect A to B, because, well, they've trashed just about everyone, but never in their company. And so why would they think that, seeing as they've done it truly to that many people, and the gossip obviously only starts once those people are no longer in present company, why would they think that I don't suspect them of gossiping about me when I've seen them gossip about so many other people? And it's really, I don't want to put a number on it, but if I had to guess, it's 90% of the people that I've ever worked with, this department, previous departments, and I'm just listening to a podcast by Ezra Klein. He's having on a mental health guy, and toward the end of the podcast, they're talking about the need for community to get people's mental health crises sort of to no longer be a crisis. And they're really attributing a lot of this stuff to the loss of community. And it's not that I wake up every day wanting to find reasons to have a low opinion of people. I don't. It is exhausting. Life would be just so much more pleasant if the things people say, whether you want to pay attention to the conversation or not, it's impossible not to eavesdrop when you're forced to be around them at work, right? It's not pleasant to be a misanthrope. It's really quite exhausting, especially when the reasons you have for your misanthropy just kind of, the list grows with time. I don't know. So if anything is going to take its toll on my mental health, it's not going to be the absence of sort of social fireworks or any other kinds of social pyrotechnics by way of hangouts. It's going to be actually that, even though it occurs far less frequently than it did back when I was young. Even when it occurs in these rare circumstances outside of work, more often than not, it has a deleterious effect on my mental health. But the Ezra Klein podcast, they're making a lot of other good points, but the specialists in him are fully agreeing on the fact that a lot of the crisis does stem from the fact that people are, these terms, the stupid terms they use. It's an atomized society. That people are isolated, and as it is the case with so many other issues, where the social science data doesn't jive with my anecdotal experience. I just love to be a social scientist, and I say this in so many kind of private journal audios I record on numerous things. I would just love to have the tools social scientists have, because I think so many issues that should be tested, so many quirks of psychology that should be tested, are just never tested. Among the top of that list is this idea: is it really a lack of social connections or worthy social connections that are contributing to people's mental health deteriorating? Even going so far as to refer to it as a mental health crisis taking place in America, or it's really just kind of the West Coast, California, a few of those places. That's where it's exacerbated the most. I don't think so. I just think people haven't crystallized this real issue that, well, I hadn't crystallized in my youth, right? But all I needed is someone like me in my current incarnation to come along and say the things that I've said here, and I would have gone, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense, right? So it's just another things, like all the things that adults warn you about as a kid. It's like, you need to look out for this in your adulthood, you need to look out for that. Like all those things I never had to be told. I never needed the don't be a retard manual. But that's the sort of things adults keep trying to thinking, like, and guidance counselors in high school, I could go on about that. It was just everything. It was all useless advice. Everything I learned on my own. Everything I actually had to look out for in terms of navigating social spaces, you just had to pick it up on your own. And all I needed was just one speech by current me, and my past me would have been set. Instead, it was a slow burn process of realization. But among the things that I'd love to be able to test, if I were a social scientist, or if I had tools that they do, research, whatever goes into making the kind of long-range, longitudinal surveys that give us glimpse, and studies and experiments that give us glimpse into the nature of psychologies and how they differ, is this receptivity to lines of discourse that I find compelling and important and enlivening, if I may use the term without it sounding cringy. There's modes of discourse that are just so enlivening that, in my experience, to the extent that anyone is receptive to them at all, it is someone who, while they were a child, they had their own space. Biggest predictor of having your own space as a child is being an only child. I was lucky enough to be an only child. This is one of the things I said earlier in the first segment of the video, is I said, me being in tune with these things that I find fascinating does not make me smarter than you, but it probably does mean that you are a lot more small-minded than me, and I can't even take responsibility for that. That screen is very, very distracting because it keeps flashing things, so I'm just going to turn the screen away so that its flashiness doesn't... There's like a million different little things on the screen for this camera, and it just kind of takes me off guard. But as I was saying, I cannot take credit for having the interest that I do, for being receptive to the right kinds of discourse and being the sort of conversationalist I am. I cannot take credit for that. I know if I had siblings and if there was these other things, if I just lived in a more squashed space, a more cramped space, if I had to share like my room with my folks, or stuff that a lot of people have to do, sadly, then I wouldn't have been receptive to those things. I'm pretty sure. I can't test this because, like I said, I'm not a social scientist, but this is a social science project I would love to see someone embark on. And again, maybe they have, and I just don't read widely enough. If you know about it, you can let me know. But in a nutshell, the quality of someone as a conversationalist above anything else, nothing in my experience is more predictive of that than whether as a child, whether or not they were given their own space. If they had siblings, forget about it. I can't think of a single person who both had siblings and grew up alongside their siblings, had to share room. People who have tightly knit families, so that like they're around students all day at school, and then they come home and you gotta have family time. And this is all happening when you're still very, very young. So you really don't know what it's like to experience these prolonged periods of just being alone with your thoughts. I think this is something a lot of meditation enthusiasts would also echo as well, but I don't think you need meditation to really catch on to it. You just need to know from a very early age what it's like to spend a lot of time alone in your room or elsewhere, but just not worrying about someone else's perception, because you are enclosed in your room, you're walled off, you are alone with your thoughts and for extended periods. Analogize it to language acquisition. I don't know if it's technically accurate to do that, but like I said, I'd love to be able to do the test. Because you just know, if you don't pick up on a language at that pivotal age, I think the official range for that is toddlerhood through age of 7, 8, 9. You're just going to have a much harder time linguistically with that language if you start picking it up age 10, 11, 12 onwards. Closer to adulthood, the more of a hard time you're going to have it if you are, unless you're in some way exceptional, and not just cognitively exceptional, but maybe in a few other ways, temperamentally exceptional. And just as it's true linguistically, I think it is true conceptually. And that's why I can never give myself any sort of credit for being switched on in the ways I am and for having these negative judgments. I'm not going to jettison the negative judgments, obviously, because I'm not a robot, right? I said they can't be blamed for the way they are because they never had a chance to be to experience growing up without siblings and therefore have enough time with their own thoughts. They didn't have any choice in that matter. They are the way they are. But then again, I am the way I am too, and I'm not going to beat myself for being unjustly judgmental in the ultimate sense, right? We can just invoke causality into this as well, and free will skepticism into this as well, to say that never be judgmental or harshly judgmental. No, because just as they couldn't help the way they are, I can't help the way I am, and that includes harsh judgment. But tell me if this is something that's ever crossed your mind, or if you know about a certain kind of social science literature that examines it, that interrogates it, where, or just, your anecdotal experience as well, because I'm talking about my anecdotal experience. I want to hear yours. Are the people that you are the most conversationally compatible with, have they always been the sort of people who had their own space, and not just here and there growing up, but truly maybe just didn't even have to go to school, because school also elbows out a lot of independent thought, or what would have gone on to be independent thought had people during those critical developmental stages, had the children been left to their own devices, had they been left to their own devices. I love my spoken typos, we can call them. Always love to leave those in, because why the fuck not, right? In terms of anyone who's still watching this, it's like, yeah, it's not going to break more than 200 views at most. It's not just that attention spans are low. They are, as I said it in the prelude to the video that I'll attack on in the end, attention spans are spanless. And so I'm just going to indulge being as scattershot as I am. But it's okay, because I do return to the thing that I was, the pre-tangential point. I'm good at least returning to it. And I like chaotic videos. I wish more people made videos as chaotic as mine are. There's a charm to it. There's an aesthetic to it. But see, as is so often the case, like with music, people want to do verse, chorus, verse. If you venture outside of verse, chorus, verse, well, you're not doing what I guess a proper musician nowadays is supposed to do, and that is try to get as big of an audience, as big of a listenership, as big of a following as you can. And that's just such a debaucherous way to look at how an artist should think. I've been listening to a lot of Steven Wilson's interviews. He really speaks eloquently about that, because he just does what he wants to do. He doesn't want to be repetitive. Every album, whether it's with Porcupine Tree, he's the frontman for Porcupine Tree, every album has to bring something new to the table. His solo albums have to bring something new to the table. It doesn't matter how much praise he gets for an album that is truly outstanding and fantastic, he's not going to repeat the formula. So he goes way beyond even just the let's jettison verse, chorus, verse in our music. Let's do prog rock, though he's genre defying, but if I had to round him off somewhere, I'd round him off to prog rock. And let's do it in all these very different ways. Let's invoke kind of electro into prog rock in a way no one's ever done before. And just no fucks given. Of course, it's an added bonus when especially your devoted fan base likes the new risque record you release. It's always an added bonus, but it's not like if everyone hated it, he would say, therefore, I ought not to have done that record. He never has remorse, no matter how well or poorly the records are received. And I'm actually glad I brought him up, because I think in the past I've mentioned, like over a dozen years ago now, Jesus, this channel has been, I can't believe it's been almost 14 years. I uploaded my first video in September 2008. I can't believe it's been so long. Sorry about that. Something Steven Wilson crystallized better than anyone else is the no remorse insofar as he's staying true to his genuine, heartfelt creativity, what he views it as. And sadly, that's not like a tutorial for how to be a proper YouTuber, or the term I guess they use is successful YouTuber. It's like the polar opposite of that. If you type in how to make it on YouTube, or just how to properly do YouTube, every single tutorial video capitalizes on maybe not things that are as bad as clickbait, but things that hover in that territory. And it's just, you go to the comments, you're expecting to see a comment pointing it out. It's like, why do you want everyone to be a drone? Why does everything have to be so polished? Why do people edit out their ums? Why are jump cuts more popular than ever? Those questions don't even get posed now. And it's not like we had, as a digital culture, a discussion on it, that things that we were concerned with back in the day we're not going to be concerned with now. It's just everyone forgets. Everyone's got a goldfish memory. Remember the term e-begging? God! I think back to 2007, like the Amazing Atheist did maybe 1/10 of a slithery style e-begging compared to the average YouTuber now, how they plug their Patreon at the end and they jerk their Patreons off by having their names run through at the end of the video on the screen. Just ingratiate ourselves to the pay pigs so we can get more pay pigs. And these are the high-minded political content creators that we need to take our cues from, or listen to in terms of how we should think about politics, is people who say thanks for or keep plugging their Patreons. Like, give me a fucking break. But anyway, the Amazing Atheist in 2007, I remember this was scandalous. He got so much shit. But the sort of slitheriness that went into his e-begging back when it was called e-begging, it's like 1/10 of the slitheriness that I see right now, but no one cares anymore. And it's not like we had a debate about it. What we had is a bunch of people with goldfish memories and a lack of concern for consistent standards. And you ought to be pissed off about it. You ought to be pissed off about every single terms of service modification on this godforsaken shithole of a vlogging site gives us less and less roominess to be ourselves, to speak our minds, to be honest, and constrains us and mangles us more and more to prioritize, maybe not politeness, as I bitched about in the last segment, but effectiveness, rising view counts, and just, chumminess. And it does tie into the guy who just kept saying, we have let the consumers manipulate us into thinking that we have more needs than we really do. We have so many wants. They're not needs, and they're distracting us from the true meaning in life. It's like, no, buddy, it's another thing. So he's rolling with it. He's rolling with the chumminess, the safeness. Just polar opposite of transgressive, not just commentaries, but transgressive figures. A crucial ingredient to being a transgressive figure is not just what you say, but it's also the willingness to point your finger and be construed as excessively judgmental. Not to be a pearl clutcher. This is a very different thing. Let's not get our apples and oranges mixed up here. Very different to be a pearl clutcher than it is to be scathingly critical. But if you go around talking about when you're clearly not a kind of hyper consumer, because clearly if you figure out the issue, that's why you're doing a goddamn documentary style video on it, but you're still gonna want to say we, because that's just And I bet you that's a guy who, like, one of his main critiques with politicians is that politicians will say we. Politicians will be the baby kissers. Politicians will be the handshakers. Politicians, one of the main facets of their job is to not come across as judgmental, even of people in the opposite camp. And even in the context of, like, America, where people in the opposite camp are essentially being apologists for, well, you know what, I don't want to bring it up, but yeah, just January 6th, the willingness to look the other way when it comes to something like January 6th, or to view it as just a hoax, or to say that too much is being made of it. It's like, and yet still, you know, someone like Gavin Newsom, who's not threatened by any of those people who are willing to downplay it, the gravity of something like January 6th, like even Gavin Newsom will tiptoe around, like, just how critical do I want to be of the base of the people who are maybe tricked into thinking that it wasn't what it was, or who are willing to downplay it because it increases their side's electoral prospects. You know, I'm Gavin Newsom. I'm not threatened in terms of my electoral cycle by any of these people, but I'm still gonna, you know, just walk on eggshells and only be critical when it comes to Trump and his cronies, those who aided and abetted him, but not those who voted him in and will keep voting for him. It's like, why, Gavin? Why any other? Insert random blue, deep blue state. Deep state, deep blue state. You know, these states that are just locked in blue, and yet the politicians are kind of worried about saying what they truly obviously mean about the red base and the red voters who are willing to just, apparently, there's no bottom in terms of what they're willing to tolerate, but like, no, we're just going to talk about the bad guys are really the pundits, the party operatives, the governors in the red camp. Those are the bad people, but the people who voted them in, no, we understand, you know, the economic anxiety, the left behind man. I gotta do a separate video on the left behind people, because they're not the actual left behind people. Back to the phone. This camera is a colossal piece of shit. It did the same thing even though I was charging it. And yet again, it can't handle. It depletes the battery at a faster pace than it recharges it? Are you fucking kidding me? But of course, gajillions of options that I just don't need, but the one thing I do need, I don't have. But that's okay. I was ranting about Gavin Newsom, right? Because I was talking about the guy who, the then and now guy who probably has issues with the fact that politicians are baby kissers and all this sort of stuff, but then, like, what is your unwillingness to point your finger and be judgmental and say, no, it's the people who fall for all these basic consumeristic tactics, these tycoons, essentially, commercial tycoons, get a bunch of money from them easily because you just put a little gimmick and you put a lizard in a car commercial or whatever it used to be. It's been a while since I've had TV where it actually forces you to watch the ads, the commercials. So that's what I was on about. And then this thing just completely, again, for the second time, it can't charge at the rate it depletes it if you have it on and presumably record the video. It is just defies linguistic expression what I bought. I mean, there's probably a way to hack it, but I don't know if I want to waste my time trying to hack it, trying to adjust the settings so that it's not as depleting. But yeah, so I brought up the then and now guy because before that I was talking about the terms of service, and he's just a perfect example of someone who there's no bottom to the level of babyishness that we have to abide by as really people who should be able to just opine on anything. The one thing that I'm going to do in the future is talk about free speech in about as meticulous way as I think anyone has done. And I'm going to just cover it from A to Z, because the term itself shouldn't be used. Really, we should all understand that when we refer to the statement free speech, the ideal, what we are referring to is the right to promulgate anything. So if you believe in the right to promulgate anything, regardless of the backlash, regardless of how much it takes off, right? And just because it's taking off, well, let's just say, like, psychopathy. We should all aid and abet psychopaths, call it psychopathism. That's like the ism. And it just takes off. Just inexplicably, everyone is convinced by it, right? But it's not imminent danger. It's not hate speech in the strict sense of the term. It's not what are some of these other things? It's not libel. It's just an ideology that is extremely vicious. And not only, let's say that it's not only a sort of ideology that aids and abets psychopaths, but it actually tries to get everyone to emulate psychopaths and to get us to resemble psychopaths as much as possible. And that's like, let's just say it had an ism. Well, it kind of does. I mean, well, a lot of stuff Nietzsche wrote about is kind of in line with that. So it's not the first time. So yeah, I guess if people took Nietzsche, certainly around the time of like the twilight of the idols, when he wrote that, let's just say that kind of started spreading like wildfire, right? So free speech qua the right to promulgate anything, that's what this debate is about. And whether you believe there's any sort of constraints on that, or whether you believe it's completely impermissible. Because if you don't believe in their right to promulgate anything, you don't believe in promulgation at all, right? Wasn't that one of the Chomsky quotes? Like, if we don't believe in your mortal enemy's right to do it, then you don't believe in it at all. But see, when he says it as the term free speech, it just sounds more noble and high-minded, as opposed to when you put it into term like the right to promulgate anything. I do believe in an unqualified right to opine, or at least to contemplate anything, so people should absolutely have an unlimited right to that. But I can complicate the story if we construe it as the right to promulgate anything. So let me see if I can move this a bit. God, every time I look at this camera, I just want to revert back to ranting about it. I can't believe that a device that is new, relatively new, did that to me. It is just beyond words. But yeah, I'm extremely impatient with the terms of service. Oh, and I got a message now. See, that's the problem with recording on the phone, is it's harder to ignore the messages. The problem with this, you can just go on at length about how much of a straitjacket we're all in, and the straitjacket gets tighter and tighter with each terms of service modification and update. But the alternatives are just so unrewarding as well. What is the site now that is the closest competitor to YouTube in terms of hits? Is it Rumble? There's no one on those sites that's really going to give you constructive feedback, constructive criticism. It's unlikely that any of them will even be able to pay attention, though not that I get many people paying attention, but at least there's some regulars, right? I have less regulars now than I had a decade ago, but I should have less regulars because I'm holding nothing back. And beyond holding nothing back in the past, now I'm also just, not just in terms of having nitpicky views on serious issues, now I'm just on board with triviality and self-indulgent kind of observational, not observational humor, but observational insights. That's what this channel is going to be about first and foremost. But if you think of some place that doesn't really have as tight a leash on its users, that's vlog related, I wouldn't mind transferring everything I'm doing here to that place and then resuming from there. But I just haven't seen a worthwhile competitor to YouTube. But yeah, it just really bothers me. Another thing that bothers me about this place is people who still think along the lines of building a movement and recruiting people ideologically, and like somehow that's gonna make some sort of a difference to anything in the end. Because really what's striking the last few years on YouTube, what's really striking is it doesn't take much time really to just surf YouTube, and very soon, within maybe 10-15 minutes, the algorithm will prop up a channel in your neck of the woods that you've never seen before. And it's someone who is opinionated and outspoken. It's usually not someone who's truly outspoken in the right way. It's not like a standard, what we used to think of as a standard controversialist, but it's someone who at least has views, right? So it's not a trivial channel. And you look at their view counts, and like sometimes it's in the millions. The views, the engagement from the audience is very much vibrant and alive, and you look at their back catalog and like they've been making videos for a while, but it's the first time you're coming across them. But at the same time, it's like just their sub count is just off the charts and their view count is off the charts, and they're talking about real things, and yet it's just not a blip on the radar in the outside world. right? It's just, I really can't emphasize how often this has happened to me, where it's someone who's been around for a while. It's not a fresh-faced YouTuber, but it's just someone I've never encountered before. And they've got this sustained engagement with their audience, but their agenda is just going nowhere, even though their view count or their sub count is in the millions, a few times closer to tens of millions. There's just so much engagement and so much support for the points they're making, and yet none of that translates to any sort of real-world impact, as best as I can see, right? And I really can't stress how often this has happened. I think just in the last calendar year, I'd come across maybe something like 30 of those types of channels. Just no one had seen before. Massively popular. It's not strictly discussing trivialities, maybe sometimes, but often they have a stance. There's some kind of initiative there that's going along with the channel. And they've got views that like so many people that like I watch regularly. Like even if they had 1/100th of the view count that channel that I've never seen has, like those people would kill for, and they would think like, holy crap, we've arrived because we've got 100,000 views on a video. It's like, no, you haven't arrived, because people who get multi-million hits on each and every video they do, they haven't arrived. They may have arrived in terms of ad revenue, but they haven't arrived in the way that they think in terms of recruitment and changing the world. So never think along the lines of changing the world. Never think along the lines of impact, because it's not a tightrope that can be walked. It is only by diluting insight that you will propel impact, and vice versa. But vacillating just makes you a compromiser. And what are you compromising with? You're compromising your dignity and your personal integrity by simplifying things, because you're just that desperate to change the world, because you're under an urgency mindset. Why are you under the urgency mindset? Because there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world. Absolutely there is. And when you are actually given the opportunity to directly reduce some of that, in whatever kind of circumstance, it can be digital, it can be offline, but when that kind of path of action is direct and straightforward, and so when the odds of you making an actual impact are sufficiently high in a direct enough way, then and only then should you, like if that involves just spouting some bullshit, like there's some sort of a bomb person that only you can convince to detonate the bomb, or hundreds of people will die. And so you got to spout some falsehoods into a megaphone, or some maybe sins of omission, or some other kinds of distortions. You got to spout them into a megaphone and essentially in public spout off a bunch of things that you don't really fully believe in, but just to get him to not blow the building up, right? Now that's a case where absolutely I would, right? Because I'm actually in control. But there is such a thing. There is absolutely such a thing as the odds of success being sufficiently low that you ought to not even think in terms of success and failure a la impact. The exclusive ways you ought to think about success and failure is a la the optimization of your insights and what you bring to the table epistemically, and calling out all manners of epistemic misconduct. That and only that is your job, no matter how popular you are, is your job as an internet talking head or writer. Nothing else. Nothing else. I understand the urgency mindset can be very tempting. There's so many things wrong. But this really is. There is wisdom in just accepting that the odds are not just sufficiently low, that's a really kind way of putting it, but I'll be diplomatic and put it in that way right now. The odds really can be sufficiently low that you ought to just not even think along those lines, because it's not just that they cheapen you as an orator, as a communicator. You do it long enough, it becomes part of your autopilot, and it cheapens you even as a thinker. And you shouldn't let anything cheapen you as a thinker. Even saying things like we in a non-literal way as an attempt to look amicable and, I guess, diplomatic. The amount of times he says it in the video, I know I keep harping back on him, but just the amount of times he says it, it's like there's no barf bucket big enough. Speaking of barf bucket, so this is a thing that a point I made in dialogue, but I can't upload that because my friend who I had the dialogue with, he didn't know I planned to upload it. So you're watching this now, you know I'm referring to you, so this will be very redundant, but I want to wrap up with this. So you've heard me make this rant, but it's since that our discourse can't be uploaded. It's just going to have to be just a kind of rehash of that. So I made the point toward the end of that really pretty brilliant talk I had with a friend. He's originally from Ukraine, so actually we will at some point do another talk where up front I'm going to let him know that it's something that I plan to upload. But he's made a lot of good points. Having hailed from Ukraine, he's made a lot of good points that I think I want to have a talk with him about what's going on. But in my last conversation with him, toward the end, we brought up the Supreme Court's ruling on overturning Casey, which was the 1991 additional ruling that was pretty much adjacent to that and kind of buttressed Wade. And so both those were struck down, I think exactly a month ago now, because now it's July 24th. It was struck down June 24th. So I should say something about it. And what I want to say about it is the people who are the most upset with it are, in a sense, the people who deserve it the most. Right? And this is not to say that I want anyone who doesn't want to carry a pregnancy to term to have to carry a pregnancy to term by law. Obviously, I don't want that. There's so many reasons why that is disastrous. But I want to just get people to really think about what underlies this current Supreme Court and their thinking. And it really is religiosity, and specifically Catholicism. And you think back to, a term for it is officially the New Atheist movement of mid and late 2000s, and to some extent the 2010s. Think about that. I don't like calling them the New Atheists. I just prefer the term anti-theists. If we conceive of anti-theism as a spectrum, then it gains a lot of credibility, because the way people refer to anti-theism, it's like they think everyone's like a 10 out of 10 intensity anti-theist. No, you could just be maybe like a 7 out of 10 on your intensity level in terms of just how bad you think theism is. You can recognize the good it does, but when you add everything up, it's like there's more bad than good by way of faith. And so that you lean toward the anti-theism side as opposed to the pro-theism side. Because people who are just so quick to rag on anti-theism, they don't, like, somehow they're always in the middle. They're neutral. It's like, no, they're sympathetic to theism, so they're pro-theists. But you don't hear that term used. You only hear anti-theism used. But anyway, so the reason I said the people who are the most devastated by it, you saw the protesters essentially weeping, a lot of them. It's not that the decision is not weep-worthy, but the specific people who are the most prone to outbursts, whether fits of rage or just sadness, you kind of, I'm pretty sure if I had footage of myself watching that, if I recorded myself seeing that, I'm pretty sure there was a big old grin or at least a smirk on my face watching it, because I've seen the through lines, and it really is what kneecapped the atheist movement the most was outspoken progressives on the internet. If you just think of all the hit pieces, who contributed most to the hit pieces? It really was politically motivated progressives. When it comes to just browbeating the atheist movement that existed, it wasn't the religious people. Religious people didn't really pay that much attention, right? It was the progressives who said, like, you're caricaturing religion. Religious people do a lot of good. The Four Horsemen are intellectual jokes. They don't engage theologians. That's what they should do. They shouldn't be thinking about this in terms of religion as a social issue. They should think about it just in terms of these, this long history of theological discourse and contributing to that in critical ways. That's what the new atheists, anti-theists, that's what the new atheists should have done. And there were a lot of other critiques, but a lot of this was hit pieces. You can see that if you rewatch my video. I think it was from 2018. It was called Torturous Objections to Torture. I take the majority crew to task. And I think I wiped the floor with them in that video because they were going after Sam Harris. Critiques of Sam Harris to come, though completely unrelated to this. But in that video, they were just completely unfair to Harris, and so I devoted a full video to that. So some of this is in that video, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. The reason it has implications for the Supreme Court ruling and so many people's negative reaction to it is, I believe, if there were far fewer political progressives who supported the hit pieces, who liked, thumbed up, shared the hit pieces, who thought the hit pieces were right, we wouldn't have had a completely decapitated, America wouldn't have had a completely decapitated, deflated atheist movement. Maybe the atheist movement would have kept steaming along. And with enough of that sort of stuff, you can see how the Supreme Court wouldn't have had as much leeway now as they do. If one thing leads to another, this is all speculation, but the satisfaction, when I think back to that, the satisfaction so many progressives had just essentially throwing tomatoes at your Hitchenses, your Dawkins, your Dennett's, that satisfaction brings a certain kind of satisfaction to me when I see such near perfect concentric circle overlap between people who are the most devastated by this decision that is a decision by way of religious zealotry. It is not, don't be fooled. It's not about constitutional principles. All of that is sophistry. I can link you to extensive arguments showing how it has nothing to do with constitutional principles. Is these people have a genuine faith. In the Supreme Court's case, Catholicism. Atheism is, you can say it's one of the things that the doctor ordered to combat that, but it's probably the best thing, the most potent thing that the doctor can order, the most potent thing. And so you can't help but feel that these people were willing to, I don't know what the right term is, I guess, cut off their nose to spite their face, whatever term we can put on it. And then you got to start thinking, why did they do it? What was the motivation? Were they really that upset with atheists, new atheists? I don't think they were. It wasn't the content of what the new atheists were saying. It was the recognition, which ties back to impact versus insight, right? It was the kind of internal, unspoken, unthought recognition, right? It's not, you don't even have to think about this clearly. Atheism is very disruptive, and it's not disruptive in the way that we care as good, kind of potty-trained progressives, because the kind of lines of division it sows are not lines along class issues, just along issues of these kind of intellectual hoity-toity enterprises. Who cares? Whether you believe in God or not, who cares whether you're a person of faith or not? These are not the important things. The important things are bread and butter class issues. Bread and butter class issues. It's they always think they're saying something brand new. The Democratic Party needs to get back to its core class consciousness. It's if you actually follow legislative bills that are proposed and struck down, it's usually the class-friendly ones are proposed by your average congressional Democrat, struck down by your average congressional Republican. So this whole idea that the Democratic Party is just so out of whack compared to the way they were decades ago, that itself is wrong, but it gets presented as this, revolutionary almost way of thinking about what the Democratic Party's concerns need to be. I guess I am talking about politics. They're just presented as something that it is just clearly not. It's boilerplate, but it's presented as not boilerplate. The furthest thing from boilerplate is the Democratic Party needs to care more about class. It's and that ethos will obviously view something like new atheism or new atheists or anti-theists as these pests, political pests who are class solidarity buzzkills. And I'm sure that they are, right? I'm sure you can have a much stronger coalition if you keep issues like faith and religiosity just on the back burner. Just be quiet. Even if you're not a believer, just, hey, don't rock the boat, because, hey, a lot of these religious people, they want to be in the big blue tent. But if you insult them, if you just speak honestly and openly and bluntly about your genuine heartfelt views on religion and how you don't respect them, they might get butthurt, and then you're going to have a smaller coalition, and we're going to lose to the Republicans. We can't lose to the Republicans. And so bring on the quietism, bring on the intellectual dishonesty, bring on the let's convince ourselves that we do respect people's faith when we clearly don't. Because there's no amount of crap these people will be willing to put up with and look the other way as long as it gets them to that kind of class solidarity, and as long as the butt-kills are kicked out of the movement. And absolutely, new atheists are buzzkills. Because I think they correctly identify religiosity, especially in a country like America, as a plague. If you haven't figured out that it's a plague now, a month removed from the overruling, then I'll just gleefully watch you cry some more as you reflect back on what caused this. But maybe me and my conversational partner in our next dialogue will actually touch on this, because he had another good thing to add to this as well. I'm not going to steal his thunder. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. What's one last thing I want to do here? Yeah, so this is going to be what this channel is like from now on. I think there's a lot of things, like a lot of critical things that are very much latent that I wouldn't have been able to think out loud about if I had siblings, if I was in a cramped space as a child, because I do think the conceptual and linguistic analogy is a strong analogy. And because I had these opportunities to develop in a specific kind of self-styled way cognitively, and to just be alone with my own thoughts and to hone my thoughts and then later on hone the dialogue, I think that there's just a lot of similar people who resemble me to some extent, who just need to hear me utter these things. And as trivial as they may sound on the surface, once you hear them uttered, you'll see that actually, oh no, wait, I actually had some of these same critiques. I just didn't have them come to the front of my mind. They were just kind of maybe closer to the intuition stage. In the next video, I'm going to talk about how on so many things as a youth, I intuited the right view where I didn't have any of the data. And then the data later on, just somehow I was just able to intuit all the right things in so many different domains of life without really having a clue as to what the data actually says, without doing any research. And maybe that was also a part of the kind of intellectual trajectory I was set on by having a lot of time to myself. Yeah, so siblings is the biggest difference maker, I think. Siblings with whom you have to share a room as a kid, because if someone's just in your proximity, people don't realize it, but it's not even someone just keeps chatting with you and distracting you from your own thoughts, but just the knowledge that someone else is nearby, that itself is disruptive of a good, proper stream of thoughts. That itself can be disruptive. And the best streams of thoughts I have are just when I go for these walks and when it's early enough in the morning and there's no one else walking around. Really, it can be just someone who's walking on the street, because you're kind of looking at them. It's like, what is this person up to? Why are they looking at that? Why are they doing that? No. So just like a solo walk early enough in the morning, hone your inner monologue, enrich your inner life. Spend more time in your head, spend less time on the internet. Lord knows you spend less time watching these YouTubers that I'm complaining about. I'm doing that much less. And as a result of that, the last year has been really a standout year. I'm not going to say the best year of my life because it's hard to top, youth. But in terms of my adulthood, it's been the best year of my adulthood, this last calendar year. And now I'm tempted to rant about the oceans of ink that have been spilled on. Oh, it's the pandemic, it's a lockdown, I'm doing badly because I can't go anywhere. Like for these people getting back to living, because you hear this, like, we need to get back to living. For these people, getting back to living is the right to be served. It's just so hollow, and yet it doesn't get called out. They need bells and whistles, they need external stimuli, they need the concerts, the festivals, the restaurants. If they don't have this kind of stuff, there's nothing inside. And proponents of meditation say the way you get past this stuff is just to learn meditation, but I really don't think you need meditation. I just think you have to be lucky enough to have been allowed to be set on the right sort of path early enough in your life, just like people who are the language they need to learn to make money as adults is the language that they were just born into. That's very much a kind of good analogy to have. I want to do one more thing here before I stop this video. Maybe it's ill-advised, but I want to do it. Ezra Klein's podcast. It's pretty much the only podcast where it's kind of can't miss or must-see TV. Whatever the must-see TV term is for the equivalent of a podcast. It's his podcast. And so he had, what's his name? Bashar, the guy who co-founded the Jacobin magazine. Ezra Klein had him on the podcast. And the typical sort of stuff. A guy who runs the Jacobin magazine, you can imagine how the conversation went, but he's just so obsessed with getting the Democratic Party back to this, what he views as having departed big time. Didn't. But he views them as having just abandoned the working class. And so one thing he said, it just struck me so much. One thing he said, and another kind of setup for this is, I think it took me 2 days to start and finish that podcast because I paused it a bit. But
within that 2-day period, a few days prior to it, I started rereading / re-listening to Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, the audiobook, which is available on YouTube. I did a community post on it. You should read that post. It's a good post. You should read all my community posts. So a few days before that podcast, right? And I finished it a few days after the podcast because the book is like 5 hours long, whereas the podcast is like an hour. And it was just one of these contrast things because Bashir, whatever his name is, Bassar, co-founder of the Jacobin, he was the guest. I'll link to the podcast. He's like, one of the things that Democrats do that's just so alienating to good, ordinary people is that they've let academics influence them on how they just talk when they're out campaigning. Like the stump speech is not stumpy enough. The stump speech is infused with just too much academic jargon and highfalutin lingo. That was his critique. I'm not making this up, folks. He said this toward the latter stages of the podcast. I'll link it to you. It's the first thing I'm going to link is that podcast. Maybe not the first thing, because this is late in the video now. So he said that, and I'm just gobsmacked. My jaw's just on the floor that he can say that about the Democratic Party circa 2022, where I think anyone who listens to, whether it's campaign trail, the stump speech, or just any time a Democratic politician is discussing something and it's kind of announcing something to the public, making a speech, the keep it simple, stupid formula has never been this robust. It's been around for decades because that is one pathway to electoral success. I'm not telling any tales out of school here. That's one path that's tried and true. And so Democrats keep running with it. But here's Bassar. Fuck, why can't I remember his last, or whatever that name is, first or last name. The Jacobin guy making the polar opposite case. And the reason it's so relevant, and the reason I brought up Neil Postman's book, which you absolutely should reread or re-listen to, is because that book was published in 1985, and through the bulk of it, Postman just does this brilliant expose on different eras, bygone eras, comparing the era of the printing press to the era of show business, which by mid-80s, certainly it was at its heyday, and how much influence it exerted in other areas of our culture that have nothing to do with show business. And so he started talking about how politics really itself takes its cues from show business. Political success follows the formula of entertainment success, infotainment success. And this is what he finished. Presumably he started the book way before 1985, but he finished it. It was published in 1985, the mid-80s. And so what he's saying essentially is, as he said, this knows no party allegiance. Both parties do this. The smaller parties do this. It's not a strictly American phenomenon, though in America it is more, the problem is worse. And he likens it all the way back to the transition from the printing press to the visual. Like a lot of people, to the extent that it's they're trying to be engaged in something, it is this pyrotechnics thing as opposed to just the written word. It's oral as opposed to written. And so if any of you have ever been in contact with the Jacobin guy, ask him about Neil Postman's book and just see what he says, because it's just such night and day. Here he is saying, like, the Jacobin guy saying the Democrats need to not be so academic in terms of how they talk. They need to dump things down more. Of course, he'll never say dump things down, because when you are obsessed with electoral success, you can never call a spade a spade. Not never, but often enough you can't call a spade a spade. And so that's what he's saying. He's decades after Amusing Ourselves to Death came out, this brilliant book that shows just how hollow and intellectually vapid even our political culture is. Here he is saying it's not intellectually vapid enough without using those kinds of words. And it's just something someone should really call him on. And those who are like-minded, who think that this is what you gotta go around and proffer as good advice for the Democratic Party, or really any party. No, take the electoral hits, take the losses, but maintain your personal integrity to the extent that you have any, even if you're a politician. Now, stakes get high enough, fair enough, like stakes are high and it's a battleground state, it's a swing state, maybe dumbed down to some extent, dumbed down to the extent that it was dumbed down in the mid-80s when Neil Postman wrote that book, but do not keep dumbing down from there on out. That's just too much. But yeah, if you're in a locked-in state and you don't really have much in the way of contenders, you absolutely have no business picking your words carefully and trying to appeal to as big a tent as possible, because you're not going to be ousted by anyone in the rival party. And if you're ousted by someone in your own party who, by and large, shares your policy platform, let's not forget, folks, let's not forget Bernie and Hillary, in terms of policies, their policy initiatives, they shared something between 90 and 95%. I forget the exact figure now, but it was absolutely definitely between 90 and 95% they shared in terms of actual policies. But people think there's this huge foundational divide between the Democratic Party, one side represented by the Bernies and the other side represented by the Hillarys. God, this was something insufferable in the mid-2010s that I had to keep hearing, that I never really put in a video because I just didn't make videos often enough. But now I'm just throwing everything and the kitchen sink on my long shit list of issues. I'm just kind of throwing it in at the end of this video. But that was just one thing. It's kind of this false mammoth divide within the Democratic Party, exemplified by these two figures of HRC and Bernie. It's like, no, they had by and large overlapping policies on over 90% of issues. So it's not the substance, it's just what kind of, they gave different stump speeches. And yeah, absolutely, I have more respect for Hillary's stump speech than for Bernie's fucking almost single syllable stump speech. At least fucking Hillary's had a few multi-syllable list. I think I've been ranting for too long. I should probably discontinue at this point. And the Jacobin guy needs to be confronted with, he needs to, if he's never really read or listened to Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, he needs to kind of Orange Clockwork style be forced to absorb that book and then hopefully see just how pathetic he is with some of these points and his desperation. Really, I would love to just see his reaction to this, because I just want to belittle him, and I want him to feel like his views are being belittled for the right reason. I really enjoy that. Because some people really do deserve it. They deserve to be belittled. It's honesty over diplomacy, over anything else that is socially useful. We ought to prioritize honesty. Even, especially me, like this video in terms of the view retention rate, like no one's, like, if 200 people make it this far, wow, amazing. So especially me, like I need to put intellectual honesty and spoken, carefully articulated things at the forefront. And really, even people who get a lot of views as well, because there's always massive channels on YouTube that just their initiatives seem like they're really popular and on fire and viral, but it never goes anywhere. Stop worrying about this things, the points you're making going anywhere. I'll be happy if just one person, from the time this video is uploaded to the time it's done, if just one person comes on and comments and says, wow, yeah, I've had these sorts of things, but they were always just not even bumbling at the top of my articulated thoughts, but they were just so damn latent. And now I've heard you, and well, yeah, now they're pretty clear. If just one person comes along, I will feel like this was well worth it. And it was well worth it anyway, because it's very cathartic to actually, once in a while, not just record audios in private, but to just do this publicly and to be a little self-indulgent. I'm self-indulgent from now on. If you don't like it, I urge you to unsubscribe. Because yeah, I can see how this is not everyone's cup of tea. But I love chaotic videos. I wish more people were comfortable with themselves to upload chaotically. And I wish people conducted themselves this way in Meat Space. But there's a bunch of shackles on us in Meat Space, and YouTube has seen to it, and many other sites have seen to it, that there's a bunch of shackles on us by way of their putrid terms of service that treat adults like babies. So, fuck the terms of service, fuck this website, but I'm still gonna upload on it occasionally.